All right, we're back on the show, everybody, and it's a pleasure to welcome this man back to the show. He is Chael Wheelock, a man wearing many, many hats, and we will probably address all of those hats in the course of this interview, coming off a very historic week in mixed martial arts, in my opinion, at the annual ABC conference. Chael Wheelock joins us now from Shawnee, Kansas. Chael, how are you today?
Hey, John. Thanks for having me back on the program. You know, I'm a big fan of your work and you personally, so always a pleasure to be on talking with you.
Well, I spent a lot of time last week going over what happened in Las Vegas. Of course, you as the committee chair of the MMA Rules and Regulations Committee, it was a very important week and a number of days removed at this point, Chael. Does it feel like a lot was accomplished last week? Because typically, as was outlined in the presentations, we saw the introduction of the unified rules, very little change over the years, and I think last week was a number of steps forward.
Yeah, John, I'm just thrilled on what my committee was able to accomplish. And we were set up by Mike Mazzulli right after he was elected the new president of the ABC at the 2015 ABC convention in San Diego. And we did monthly conference calls setting forward, and we're a recommendation body. That's how we were set up. And I tried to establish that in the media and on social media and whomever would ask me. We make recommendations. Do what you will with our recommendations. For instance, we made a recommendation that we wanted to allow 12 to 6 elbows. Medical committee wasn't comfortable with that. The Association of Ringside Physicians wasn't comfortable, and the executive committee of the ABC wasn't comfortable, so it wasn't presented. But 6 of our recommendations were presented. They were voted on, passed 42-1 with 1 abstention. We can certainly talk about that.
Oh, we will.
And I'm thrilled. I'm sure we will. And I'll say whatever you want me to say. No restrictions. I'll speak as absolutely candidly as I possibly can, with absolutely no restrictions. But you know, this is a sport that I love dearly. I watched when I was a kid. As I always like to tell the story, my mom paid the $14.95, November 12th, 1993, at home here in Shawnee, Kansas, a suburb of Kansas City. Watched UFC 1, and 23 years later, you know, in a small way, I've been able to contribute to this sport that I love. And if you look back, the last real changes to the unified rules were done in April of 2001, and that to me is preposterous. Look how different fighting is since 2001. Look how different the NHL is since 2001, or the National Football League. You know, the National Hockey League has made fundamental changes since 2001. Even baseball, that prides itself on thinking it's still the year 1884, they've made tremendous changes. They're looking at instant replay. There's numerous changes when you talk about drug testing with baseball. And yet MMA somehow wanted to be locked in like this time capsule, and I don't know why. I absolutely have no idea why. So what Mike Mazzulli and I talked about when he was elected president of the ABC last July in San Diego, John, is let's be like the NFL competition committee. Every single year, the NFL, they have their competition committee. They say, how do we make our game safer and how do we make it better? And I don't know how big of an NFL fan you are, and I know it's a slippery slope to compare one sport to the other, but I will say this on the NFL. They were looking at a situation with the extra point kick, not the 2-point conversion, but the extra point kick. And I think in 2014, only 7 were missed. So the percentage was like 99.99 something. I think in a 3-year span, less than 20 extra point kicks were missed. So it was ridiculous. So the competition committee said the game has passed us by. Maybe in the 1960s or 70s, there was some chance to this. Now, it's virtually a guarantee, and it's become pointless. So what do? You move it from the 2 to the 15. Suddenly in the NFL, it became very exciting, very meaningful, very strategic again. Maybe teams would go for a 2-point conversion in bad weather. It changed it. That's the evolution, and that's what we were trying to bring with MMA. It's not as though we just set out and said, hey, we want to change the rules or these were wrong. We thought, let's look at everything with the idea as open-minded as we can be and say, how do we make MMA safer? How do we make it better? And I think we've really done a big step in doing that with the 6 new changes.
So in watching these presentations and just seeing from afar how everything went down last week, there's definitely a political component to this as well, Chael. When it came to these are your recommendations, was it a process of having to shop these to the different commission members, those who would be voting on it? I mean, how confident were you going into that vote of the support that you would get, which, as you mentioned, there was only 1 vote against these recommendations?
That's right. Well, I'm not a political person at all. I'm probably learning the hard way that I'm not a political person, but I never even did student council when I was a kid in school in Kansas City. I'm not into lobbying. I really wouldn't even know how to lobby. I know that we had the support of Andy Foster, who chairs the medical committee, and Andy is outstanding. He's the executive officer, runs the California Commission, a former pro MMA fighter. I know we had the backing of Mike Mazzulli, the president of the ABC, runs the Mohegan Tribe Commission, the executive committee. If there was any lobbying to be done, and I honestly don't know if there was or there wasn't because I stayed out of it, it was probably at that level. I felt that we were going to present our proposals to the best of our abilities, and people were either going to vote for or against. And as I was hearing people talk, people were coming up to me and saying, "Oh, this is great, and you have my support." But again, I'm not a political animal. I wouldn't lobby. I don't know how. It's just nothing to me. We put it through, and only New Jersey voted no. And it's really disappointing because I don't think it had anything to do with safety. I honestly don't. Because if you talk about safety, the ABC's medical committee unanimously approved. The Association of Ringside Physicians unanimously approved. 42 of the 43 voting commissions approved. So 42 to 1. So if people want to throw out safety, we're making the sport safer. It's ludicrous. It really is.
Well, and I've got to say, Sean, you're really going out on a limb when you're going to be that one dissenting vote going against an overwhelming majority. And New Jersey has been a state that has largely been viewed as a much more progressive state when it comes to mixed martial arts. So in hearing the response that they had to John McCarthy's presentation, what are you thinking at that moment? Because it felt like this representative, Rhonda Utley-Herring, was hearing a very different explanation than the one I was hearing from John McCarthy. In particular, the definition of a grounded opponent, which she seemed to believe is somehow going to add 2 more strikes to the head, when in fact it's using it to largely restrict and make it much clearer what a grounded opponent is.
Well, this is a woman who was there representing New Jersey, and I'll say I've done numerous fights in New Jersey. I've always looked up to that commission. I've always held them in the highest esteem, and I'm using that in past tense now, not in present tense. But when I've been there doing fights, I thought they were an outstanding commission, really putting fighter safety forward, being progressive. But again, I'm using that in the past tense. I've never seen this woman before. First time I ever saw her was at the ABC convention. Mm-hmm. I will tell you this. She was there as the representative for the New Jersey Athletic Commission. It was clear to me she had no idea who John McCarthy was. She had no idea who Randy Couture was. That to me, John, is like if you get an assignment that you're going to work in the music industry and you don't know who Beyonce is or Bruce Springsteen or Paul McCartney. What's going on? Why are you there? And I was telling my wife about this afterwards when I got back from Las Vegas about how openly she disrespected John and made a very loud statement to Mark Ratner, although poor Mark was put on the spot. This is a room of about 120 people in Las Vegas. You know, Mark, you need to educate this man about MMA. And my wife asked if people laugh, and I said, no, it was like Steve Carell in The Office, uncomfortable silence, or that Ricky Gervais moment where it's that horrible, uncomfortable silence. I mean, who's ever seen John McCarthy disrespected? And to tell John McCarthy that he needs to be educated about MMA? I mean, is someone telling Neil Armstrong he needs to be educated about landing on the moon? This is preposterous. But again, how are you a representative of your athletic commission at a combative sports seminar and meeting, and you don't know who John McCarthy is and you don't know who Randy Couture is? I don't care if she knows who I am. That makes no difference to me. But come on. I mean, if you're putting a Mount Rushmore up of MMA, John and Randy are at least in consideration of those 4. And it was ridiculous. She also went on to say that the UFC began in Mississippi in 1997, which would be a big surprise to Art Davey and everybody who was there in Denver on November 12th, 1993. To me, and I'm just speaking as my own personal opinion, I'm not representing anybody else, it was one ignorant, disrespectful comment after another, and it went on for 2 days. It was embarrassing, actually. If it hadn't have been so pathetic, I almost would have felt bad for her, but I didn't.
And I guess this represents to me an issue that still does exist, that here you have near unanimous support of these rule modifications being pushed forward, and yet still the ABC lacks that power to mandate any of these. So we have a situation where New Jersey is within their rights to ignore everything that happened last week. And That's something that I feel is concerning when suddenly you can't have this uniformity, even though we're close to it on how this vote went down last week.
Well, John, earlier today I recorded my podcast that I do with Ben Askren and Joe Warren, and we had Chael Sonnen on as our guest, and we were talking about this. And I was saying to Chael Sonnen on our program, look, the ABC is one gigantic gentleman's agreement. One commission can't tell nor compel another commission to do anything. That includes suspensions. For instance, in Kansas, and I'm a non-paid member of the Kansas Athletic Commission, as I think you mentioned when you introduced me, Melvin Gillard was just suspended for having a non-PED illegal substance in his body. And so he received a one-year suspension from Kansas. That doesn't have to be honored by anybody. It will be, but it doesn't have to be. If Pick a commission in the ABC. It doesn't matter whom. If they say, you know what, we want to license Melvin Gillard, they can do that because they're autonomous. We can't do anything as Kansas to stop them. What really keeps everybody in line, honestly, is peer pressure. But if New Jersey says tomorrow, we want to allow head kicks and stomps on a grounded fighter, they can do it if they can get it passed. If they say we want to take away closed fist striking and go back to open-handed striking like Pancrase in the early and mid-'90s, they can do it. The ABC is a giant gentleman's agreement, and every commission is autonomous. They come together. It says an association. It's really more of a confederation. It's a confederation of all these disparate bodies. Some are Canadian provincial. Some are Canadian municipalities, like Edmonton, for instance, rather than Alberta. You have these U.S. state commissions that regulate different things. Some only do pro, some do AMI, some do kickboxing, some do Muay Thai, some don't. It's really a mixed bag. And then when you have the Native American reservations in both the U.S. and Canada. So, again, it's a confederation, and the ABC is only as good as membership compliance. But there's no federal mandate. And even if there were a federal mandate, the ABC is an international body now. So it really goes back to being as good as you want to be as a member of the ABC. If you want to be a terrible member of the ABC, or as in the case of Missouri and Ohio, not paying your dues, not sending representatives, there's nothing anybody can do about that.
Another important element was adjusting the criteria for scoring. And a lot of people talk about the problems with the scoring system. You and your committee actually put together language to help educate people, especially 10-8 rounds. And maybe it's just me, Sean, but it feels like over the last month since this language was introduced, you are seeing more 10-8 rounds, I feel, because for the first time we actually have a definition of what you should be looking for in a 10-8 round. Have you noticed this over the past while? Because this to me was a long time coming, because I think 10-8's largely you're looking for an outtake from a horror movie to justify a 10-8 round, and that's what people believe is a 10-8 when that should not be.
That's exactly right, John. And I think that's the influence of John McCarthy and his trainings and starting to liberalize it and starting to teach that. But now it's official. And I don't even think New Jersey, with everything that they said, I don't even think that they objected. Maybe they did. I don't think they objected. But this is something that it seems like everybody was very vocal. This and the eye pokes, which I'm sure you want to talk about, everyone's saying, wow, this is great. This is what's needed. You know, the 10-point must system was developed in boxing because you had a situation under previous boxing scoring where Fighter A barely wins round one, and then in round two, Fighter B knocks down Fighter A 3 times, and now it's 1 round apiece. That doesn't make any sense. That's why the 10-point must system was put in. It was adopted for MMA. Maybe it's not perfect for MMA, but it's the system that we have. But while we have a 10-point must system, and you can give 10-9s, 10-8s, even 10-7s without point deductions for fouls, when commissions and judges say, oh, I'm never going to give a 10-8 round, and you do hear that. And we've had judges, we meaning our committee, had judges tell us, my commissioner said never, ever give a 10-8, or my executive officer told me that if I give a 10-8, you'll never work on the show again. Then why do that? Why not just do an X and an O, or a red mark and a green mark? If it's there, utilize it. And John, I'm really of the strong opinion that the vast, vast majority of referees and judges want to do their best. When you see them not doing their best, it's not out of a place of malice. I think it's out of a place of just not having proper education. So if it's clearly laid out, this is the criteria for a 10-8. This is a 10-7. On the very, very rare occasion, we hope you don't give a 10-10, but you might never. Maybe it's a 1 in 10,000, 1 in 100,000, 0 in 100,000. But there is the 10-10. This is the 10-9. If you look at UFC 200, and this is a great fight, I've been saying this a lot to illustrate people, including guys at my own gym. Look at the Lesnar-Hunt fight. Round 2, very close round. I would score that 10-9 for Mark Hunt based on effective striking, but it was very close. Mm-hmm. Round 3, it's a wipeout for Lesnar, right? He hits the takedowns, he's establishing ground and pound, he's really landing some big shots, really hurting Hunt. Why would you give that a 10-9? How is that fair that that's one round apiece? That's why the 10-9, the 10-point must system is there, and that's why the 10-8 has been liberalized, for lack of a better term. It's been opened up, but more importantly, it's been clearly defined. If you're a judge and you say the loser of the round's always getting 9, you shouldn't be a judge, quite frankly. And hopefully now, here's the criteria, and it's clear, much, much clearer to understand.
Also, you mentioned the extended fingers, and for those listening here, some people may not even realize this, that prior to this, referees could not deduct points until the actual penalty occurred, when there was actually an eye poke. I think this is something that fighters, they're using the rules to their advantage, and it's something that is we're seeing a preponderance of with eye pokes, and you see the warning signs, and up until this point, they were not able to prevent that from happening until the eye poke occurs. So this is a big step forward in that sense, where now fingers cannot be extended towards the face, or else you could be penalized.
That's right. And the 3 biggest advocates, we voted in our committee 10-0. It was an easy pass, but the 3 most vocal, biggest advocates were the 3 prominent fighters on our committee: Randy Couture, Jeremy Horn, and Matt Hughes, saying how outstanding this is, because they know what a serious eye poke can do. It can end your career. You get a corneal abrasion, you get a laceration, you can have sight damage. It's serious. So previously, before this rule, and this is almost impossible to believe, and I don't think fighters really even understood this, you can pitchfork out your fingers, you can have them together or splayed, but right at your opponent's eyes and make that jabbing motion. People talk about the John Jones rule. I think that's unfair to John Jones, but John Jones is a fighter that's done this technique a lot. A referee could not say anything. Sometimes you would see them say, hear them say, "Watch your fingers," but technically, they really weren't even allowed to say that. You could feint with your fingers, get within one half of a millimeter. It was only a foul if you poked the eye. But you could extend the fingers, you could make jabbing motions with your extended fingers towards the opponent's eyes, and that was legal. Now that's not legal anymore. The referees will start warning the fighters. And I've seen a few people online say, they're going to start deducting points. No, what they're going to say is, watch your fingers, because before they couldn't say that. It's being proactive instead of reactive. We don't want to see eye pokes. Nobody wants to see eye pokes in this sport. And this eliminates those, or it comes very close to. Some grapplers ask me, well, what about extending fingers towards the body? Yeah, absolutely. It's extending fingers towards the face and the eyes of the opponent, either moving forward, standing still, or moving backwards. So either make a fist, put your hands palms up, fingers up, or put your hands, the outside of your hand forward towards your opponent, fingers down. I don't know why you would do that, but you could. But it's making that pitchforking, jabbing, fingers extended motion, which is ridiculous. You wouldn't do it in your gym. You would be kicked out of your gym. It's bad sportsmanship, and now the referees finally have a tool to protect these fighters.
Of the people on your committee, and you don't have to name names, of the rule changes...
Oh, no, I will.
Well, by all means then. You mentioned that one was unanimous in the room. Were there any that it did take a lot of convincing, and there were debates on both sides of which you had to come to an agreement, and maybe even yourself personally, Sean, that maybe you started on one side of the fence and ended up on the other on any of these rule changes?
John, that's a great question, and we're really like-minded people. Probably the biggest debate was on the grounded opponent, and it was immediate that everyone said this has to change, this gaming the system, one finger down, this isn't right. It was what constitutes a grounded fighter. Now, what's funny is Couture, Horn, Hughes, they want soccer kicks to the head. I think Jeremy Horn would even be the leader of this charge, saying, man, if you're not prepared to get kicked in the head, then don't be a professional fighter. But look, I understand the realities of a lot of different things. and we didn't want to look at that situation. We're trying with the grounded fighter to make it safer. So it wasn't that we didn't feel it should be changed, it's how do we change it? What constitutes a grounded fighter? And it wasn't even heated debate, it was more technical. We talked about, well, do you do weight bearing on both hands? But then I said, well, what's your definition of weight bearing? My idea of weight bearing, John, might be different from your idea of weight bearing. And if you're a referee, can you really tell if someone's weight bearing? What you can tell is if somebody is putting their palms flat or making a fist and putting their knuckles flat, or, as has always been the case, if you want to ground yourself, take a knee. The idea is twofold. One, it's to get fighters out of playing the game, not because it hurts the integrity of the sport, and it does, but it's primarily because fighters are leaving themselves up to knees, trying to game the system, trying to catch an illegal knee, and they catch their opponent out. The other thing is, in that position, move. We want activity in MMA, move. So if you come in for a shot and it's stalled and you get put into a guillotine or a head chancery, don't just start tapping down your index finger to ground yourself to avoid the knees and time the knees and maybe try to get your opponent a point taken away or disqualification. Move. If you want to ground yourself, but if not, move. But don't be tapping the mat, the canvas, like you're tapping your keyboard. And that's the idea. How New Jersey came out and said that wasn't safe is preposterous to me, because this is making it absolutely safer.
I'm going to go out on a limb here, Sean, and you're not going to be spending a summer vacation in New Jersey anytime soon, will you?
Look, here's who I feel bad for. I love New Jersey. It is a historic MMA state. It's a historic boxing state. I think New Jersey is gorgeous. I spent a lot of time there doing fights when I was a soccer commentator. They have amazing fighters, amazing gyms, amazing fans. Here's the risk of New Jersey and any commission in the ABC that doesn't want to adopt these rules changes. The UFC gave us their full support through Mark Ratner. Bellator gave us their full support through Corey Schaefer. And that was made clear. So now does the UFC, does Bellator, do some of the other organizations, World Series of Fighting, Invicta, Victory, Titan, Legacy, if they expand out from being a regional, RFA, will they go to a state like New Jersey or any place else, any other commission, if they don't adopt the unified rules? So I feel bad for the fight community, including the fans in New Jersey, because of these actions, which I think are politically motivated and personally motivated, to have nothing to do with fighter safety by the New Jersey Athletic Commission. And I probably better make this clear. I'm speaking as me. I'm not speaking representing anybody else. These are just my personal feelings.
In regards to the ABC, and there's been a lot of discussion that there could be the formation of an alternate overseer of commissions, essentially in competition with the ABC in some sense. I don't think it's really a wise move that we see a fractured government, essentially, for mixed martial arts. How realistic is this happening, Sean? Is this something inevitable, or is it something in the planning stages? What can you tell us about that?
John, it is happening. It was launched. I don't even know their name. Everyone calls it the fake ABC, which I think is pretty funny. They had a convention in New Orleans in early July. I know Missouri, Tim Luckenoff, the immediate past president of the ABC, and a lot of people think he was voted out. Tim was out through term limits.
Yes.
I know that he is a big person behind this. Bernie Profato, who ran against Mike Mazzulli and lost by 3 votes to be the new ABC president in 2015. I know he was there. I believe Washington State sent people. I believe New Jersey sent people, although I could be wrong, and I believe Indiana sent people. To me, what are you doing? Because if you're being different, are you not honoring suspensions? Are you going to let suspended fighters fight? Are you going to put in your own rule set? That's not what we need. You know, if you think about, and I'll go back to the NFL, one of the beauties of the NFL is that there is that level of consistency. Not only do you have the consistency of officiating, but for instance, you don't go to Soldier Field and a touchdown is worth 6 points, and then you go to Arrowhead Stadium and it's worth 8 points, right? And then you go to Seattle to play the Seahawks and the touchdown's worth 4 points. You have that consistency. So it's already fractured enough with the ABC because of the lack of really any type of oversight power. And now if you're doing a rival organization, the so-called fake ABC, and maybe you're not honoring suspensions or you're putting in a different rule set, that's not fair to the fighters, that's not fair to the fans, and overall that's bad for the sport. All of this stuff I see is petty and politically motivated.
I want to just go rapid fire through a couple of topics here. Of course, Kansas has been at the forefront of same-day weigh-ins. If I'm not mistaken, Sean, you were the first state to actually do same-day weigh-ins, correct?
We were, but I'll tell you, this is Andy Foster's idea. Andy invited me, not as my role as a Kansas commissioner, but as chairman of the Rules and Regs Committee, when he had his weight-cutting summit the week before Christmas in Los Angeles. And I think there were about 60 or 80 industry people in the room, fighters, regulators, promoters, people from organizations like the UFC and Bellator. It was outstanding. And I was convinced. And I looked back at our rules and regs, and I talked to our executive director, Adam Rohrbach, and we decided not only should we do this, we had the ability to do this. So I called Andy, and we're friends. I said, Andy, I don't want to steal your thunder. This is your idea. I said, but we can do this immediately, and we can start on this Bellator coming up. And this is after I was dumped from Bellator, so it was just random that it was Bellator was the first big show in the state. I said, Andy, but this is your idea. Out of respect to you, if you want us to wait, we will. And he's like, no, absolutely, Sean. This is about fighter safety. It's not about ego or who's first. If you can get it in, because we have to go through some bureaucratic processes and have an emergency session. So by all means, if you can do it in Kansas, do it. And we did it immediately. We had much, I'll use the word looser, on our rules and regs, the way they were written on the formation of our athletic commission in California. And we put it in. Fighters love it. You and I both know it's virtually impossible to get 100% agreement in MMA. This is 100% agreement amongst fighters. They love this. And we're talking about basically allowing people to weigh in at 10 a.m. instead of having to wait for the Bellator weigh-in, which would be like 5 or 5:30 local time. But the fighters absolutely love this. It all comes down to fighter safety. And if you want, I can pick off all the arguments who people say, oh, this is a bad idea. This is a great idea. Ultimately, it's about fighters being properly hydrated so they're not taking serious concussive brain injuries or having organ failure. It's about getting these fighters rehydrated as much as possible and not making them suffer and moving the weigh-in further and further away from the actual start of their fight to where it's still reasonable and fair.
No, and it's the standard. I don't think you could, if you're the UFC now, if you're Bellator, I don't think you can go back to the old model after introducing this. And this goes back to the changes made last week, Sean, and the same-day weigh-ins. There's nothing that I get more resistance from fighters than change. Even if it's positive change, that it's always, don't mess with my routine. But you look at the changes last week, in my circles, it's been met with overwhelming positivity, and the same with the same-day weigh-ins. So I think that a lot of these fighters, I think, are much more open-minded to some of these changes when they realize that their health is benefiting from these changes.
Well, and I think that there's this urban legend out there that if fighters have more time, they're going to be bigger, heavier, or fatter. You talk to any fighter who's a professional at any sort of level, and now if we're talking about UFC, Bellator, World Series of Fighting, even on down through the mom-and-pop shows, they know what their ideal weight is. So I'm just going to say some hypothetical numbers, but let's say you're a top 25 in the world lightweight. So you're fighting at 155. So unless it's a title fight, you have to weigh in at 156. So you're probably training and walking around and feeling your best in the gym somewhere between 180, 185. So you know what you want your weight to be in the cage. So it's probably going to be somewhere around 174 to 178. If you've weighed in 7.5 hours earlier than normal, you're not going to the all-you-can-eat buffet. You're not scarfing down a large cheese pizza. You're not going down and eating donuts at Tim Hortons, right? You're trying to get back to your weight. No fighter is saying, wow, this is awesome. I have 7 more hours. Let's see if I can put on 20 pounds and be fat and sluggish. All it means is they're getting to their target weight quicker, which means that they're more rehydrated, and it means that they're safer as fighters. You know, this is something people lose sight of. MMA is a dangerous sport. It's a violent sport. But within those parameters, we want to make it as safe as possible. There are people who reject combat sports out of hand, and fair enough, and they say they should be shut down. Hey, if that's their feeling, that's their feeling. But that's not reality. The reality is, how do we make a fairly dangerous sport or even an inherently dangerous sport as safe as possible? And to me, I think science is on our side. The medical community is on our side. You get fighters properly rehydrated. That's a huge step forward towards safety.
Last thing here, Sean, it came out this morning about the formation of the Professional Fighters Association, and this was one of the quotes from their press release. Quote, "The scales have tipped in favor of the UFC for too long." Now, I take two things from that. Number one, they are targeting professional fighters and specific to the UFC. Do you feel that, A, this is something that 6 months from now we're going to look at today as something substantial, or is this a pipe dream as unions and associations in fighting have been, you know better than anyone? I mean, it's something talked about. Very little action has been taken over the number of years, but it seems that there's a lot of factors at play, in particular over the last year where you're seeing a lot more fighters speak up about these issues. Is this a good step forward that we're seeing with some interesting heavyweights that are trying to form this now?
Well, I think there are some really complex issues, and I always come in everything that I do, including Rules and Regs Committee, and when I'm a television commentator, I'm always an advocate of fighters. To me, it's fighters first. A lot of promotions say we're fans first. Hey, that's cool. Fans are integral to MMA. I'm a fighters first guy. So anything that benefits the fighters, I'm for. This is where I see the complexity of the issue, which maybe is a problem. So as a commissioner in Kansas, I go to a lot of small shows, what I call mom and pop shows in hotel ballrooms and National Guard armories and even high school gyms. Those fighters, those professional fighters, by and large, are making substantially less than $2,000. Often, even with a win bonus, they're making less than $1,000. So is a fighters association for them? Is it just for fighters in the UFC? Is it just for fighters, say, in a major? And then how do you define a major? Is Victory, who I commentate for, are they a major? Yes or no? Well, they would say they are. Is World Series of Fighting? Well, if World Series of Fighting, then why not Legacy? Is it only Bellator in the UFC? Well, what about Invicta? What about somebody like my buddy Ben Askren, who I do the podcast with, who lives in Milwaukee? He's a full-time U.S. resident, but he doesn't fight in the United States anymore because he's employed by one championship. So it gets to a lot of complex issues. And then if you have an association, you're probably asking members to pay dues. So let me ask you this, John. If you're a guy who's fighting these small shows that I go to all the time, including one I'm going to be at in Topeka, Kansas on Saturday night, and you're a guy who fights 3 times a year, and you're fighting for $600 and $600, and dues for this organization are $500 a year, why do you join? I don't know the answer to that. It's going to be a big problem. To me, I think if you focus exactly who is eligible, or maybe you just do it with an organization, maybe that's the more realistic way forward. I don't know enough about what they want to do, what they're trying to accomplish. I hope their hearts are in the right place, that they truly want to help fighters, but because our sport is so diverse, so spread out, and people have a tendency, even people in the industry, to think that this sport is the UFC down. It's not. It's the mom and pop shows up. There are a lot more people who will never fight in the UFC who are professional fighters than those in the UFC. So I just wonder how it affects everybody. I can see how it would affect just fighters in one promotion, one organization. I don't know how it's helping or benefiting or even affecting the guy who's fighting for $200 and $200 in the National Guard Armory.
Yeah, it seems like there's going to need to be a significant leap of faith from a lot of fighters to believe that this is real. And as you mentioned, that you hope that the hearts are in their right places and that this is a progressive step forward. But there's a lot more questions than answers at this point in time. Sean, we have to wrap things up, but I do want to encourage everyone to check out the Lineup MMA podcast that Sean mentioned earlier. Their guest is Chael Sonnen this week. Each week, Sean Wheelock joined by Ben Askren and Joe Warren.
Yeah, Lineup MMA, I really love it. It started as Let's Get It On with Big John McCarthy. John's still involved. He was a guest last week. He's an executive producer on the show. John just travels a lot. He works a lot. I think he's on the road more than I am, maybe, 45, 46 weeks a year. And the time commitments just got to John, but he's still heavily involved. And so John and I thought, who would be a great replacement? We settled on 2, Ben Askren and Joe Warren, outstanding fighters, champions in MMA, champions in wrestling. They're buddies. All those wrestlers know each other and they're tight. So we're having so much fun doing it. So if you knew it as Let's Get It On, it's now Lineup MMA with Ben Askren, Joe Warren, and me, Sean Wheelock. And this week, Chael Sonnen, another guy who comes out of those U.S. Olympic wrestling circles and a really close friend of Joe Warren, a really good friend, contemporary of Ben Askren as well. And it's a fun show. You know how much fun podcasting can be. I love doing it. It's great. And the reach that we have, we hear from fans listening all over the world. When I was doing a one championship, someone in China told me they actually listened to the podcast, which made me feel very, very good and very humble at the same time. But Lineup MMA every week. You can find it where you can find any podcast.
Well, you can check it out, lineupmma.com. Sean is on Twitter at Sean Wheelock. He's also the voice of Victory Fighting, doing boxing with Jim Ross and Al Bernstein, one of the busiest men in combat sports. I want to thank you so much for taking some time out of your day, Sean, and always great to chat with you.